So I picked up a couple of pallets, and I'm gonna try to make this entryway bench so you can use it to put your shoes on or organize some basic things. We're gonna try to use some more through mortise and tendons there. May or may not make the legs straight, right? And we're gonna work on the top in this video, but the first thing we have to do is fix up the table saw, make sure it's working. We're going to do that by putting in a half by 41-inch V-belt, so it'll run through and actually turn the blade. And so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to try to find the right socket to adjust the motor tension. As you can see, I go through quite a few different sockets, even had to switch from imperial to metric and back. I believe it ended up being a 7/16, so I'd have to double check that, but it took me forever to find it. I finally found the right one. I'm putting it on the ratchet, and I'm going to loosen up the motor. And the goal here is to loosen up the motor enough so that I can move that tension around, and then I have to stick my hands up into that tiny cabinet and put the belt onto the sprocket in there that turns the actual blade, that connects the motor to the blade. I have issues here, so I have to go around, lower the blade down because the sprocket. Take two, I'm now able to stick the belt in there and get it around that sprocket within the cabinet. And then I will try to put it on the motor itself, but realize that the motor's too far out and the bolt is still too tight, so I need to come back with my ratchet, loosen it up just a little bit more to allow me to move the motor back up into place so I can hook that belt around. I have some issues with it falling off the sprocket within the cabinet there, but once I get it on, I'm able to get that tension set just about right, and then take my ratchet again and tighten that bolt back up so that tension stays in place without the belt bouncing off. All right, so I've got the new belt on, but now we gotta test it. So let's plug this thing up and see if it works. So the fun joys of working in a small shop is you have all of this stuff that's always in the way. And so what I'm doing here is I'm moving things out of the way so I can set up the table saw and use it and cut these pieces square so I can get them glued up. Another fun joy of a small shop is I'm constantly losing things. I set it down and then I completely forget where I put it. And so here I am looking for, I believe, my tape measure so I can get my fence set up. Now that I found my tape measure and safety glasses, I'm going to measure each of my pieces. Each one, unfortunately, is a different width, and so I will have to make a different cut every single time. To do this, I'm going to start by cutting only about 16 to an eighth of an inch off of my current measurement, and then flip it over and do the same thing. So in total, I'm losing about at most a quarter off of both sides. And so that's what I'm doing. I'm checking the front and the back of the blade to ensure that it is square, that it will cut square. I'm trying to fine adjust that. And as you can see, I'm leaning close trying to make sure that they are square. One thing I forgot to do here is you'll notice I turn the table saw on and then I forget to check the height. And so I immediately turn it off. And now I'm going to check my blade height to my piece, my work piece, and then I'll raise my blade up just so I have about an eighth of an inch or so of my blade over higher than my work piece. And with this old rusty table saw, that takes quite a bit of effort, but I eventually get there. And now I'm able to send these through and cut them square. I did send them through a joiner and planer, but only on one side. And so I'm going to go ahead and cut both sides just so I can have a nice clean edge. And so I'm going through here. After that first cut, I'm adjusting my saw again, just about a 16th to an eighth, just to take a little bit more off so I can get a nice fresh cut on both sides. Unfortunately, though, this isn't a very high-powered table saw, so it does still burn. These are relatively new blades, but even still, it struggles to go through this material, and that may be the tension of the belt, like I was saying earlier. But after finishing the one, I will do my second and third piece following the same process, right? I'll measure how wide my pieces are. I know they're not square, so I'm going to find my narrowest point and take about a 16th off of that, maybe an eighth off of that, adjust my fence as necessary. Again, check the front and back of the blade to ensure that the fence is square to the blade. And then I'll send it through again, making sure I put the cleanest edge against the fence. And keeping my hands away from the blade, I'll send it all the way through. Again, this is two times speed, and so it took a very long process to go through these safely. Right, now that I've done it with my two pieces, again, I'll make that second cut, adjust just a little bit, and send it through my second piece a second time. Again, triple checking to make sure that the blade is square to the fence. I'll send it through, and then we'll grab that third piece. All right, and that third piece is the largest, and it took the most effort. And here I am doing that same process that I did with the first two pieces with my final piece. Like I said, it was a little bit bigger in width, and the table saw did not like that. I do think I need to look into adjusting that tension on that belt quite a bit more, because it does not like anything over about 3/4 of an inch thick. But like I said, I'm making sure that the front and back of the fence is square to the blade, and then we're going to find the best edge with the least amount of voids and send it through. This piece was so out of square, I had no choice but to send it through the table saw, otherwise it would not have glued up. And I'm going to show you guys here in a second how bad it was, this cutoff piece was, which is again why I sent all of them through. Gotta do the finger check, make sure it's smooth. But yeah, check this out. You can't see it real good from this angle, but I'll flip it around here and look how crooked that is. I mentioned I sent these pieces through a joiner and planer, but that was after I did my initial glue up. Starting out, I just took all of those pallet pieces and clamped them together, and that'll come back to bite me, as you'll see. But what I'm doing now is I'm once again moving stuff out of the way in my small shop so I can use my miter saw and square up these ends. I initially thought I was going to end up with a piece that was going to be longer than my saw could cut, but due to all of the milling, I had plenty of cut capacity on my saw. I started off by squaring off one end on each of these pieces, and I was going for as much length as I could. My first two pieces, I was able to get about 36 inches, but my last piece, it was a little bit shorter. I wanted to kind of cut out some of those voids, and ended up being about 30 inches, so I decided that was going to be my total length. After I get it all cut up, I move everything over to my workbench, and now I'm trying to find a good orientation with the least amount of voids. Again, I just took old pallets and clamped them together, and I didn't take any time beforehand um, to mill up the pieces that I was gluing together, and so I'm paying for that in the back end. And now that I've got a good orientation of these boards that I think is going to work, I'm starting to lay out my clamps and get them in a rough set length, and then I'll set all of my pieces on there. Now you saw me mark them with the combination square, and that was simply just so I could remember to stop my glue line so I didn't waste glue, and obviously I didn't remember even marking that, and so I used a lot of unnecessary glue because there's about 6 inches there of overhang on those two big pieces that I don't need. But I get my clamps on. I have an issue with it not being flat, so I use the squeeze clamp there to flatten it out, and then I tighten all of my bar clamps. I then went through and tried to wipe off any excess glue to not make a huge mess and keep the mess to minimum. I was able to take that squeeze clamp off, and there I am wiping, And then I realize that my piece is not square. There I am checking it, and there is a huge void that I just crushed, and now my piece again is not square, and I'm gonna have to fix that later. The fun joys of working with pallet wood. I went back into the abyss of the small shop to find my tape measure to confirm my suspicion by measuring one side and the other. By doing this, I realized I was right and discover how far off it is. There's a difference of at least a quarter from this edge to this edge. Fun joys of working with pallet wood. At this point, I decided to just let the glue dry and come back when it's done to keep working on it. Thanks for watching. Come back next time to see if I'm able to fix it.